So we've been speaking about the idea that Sovev is the reward for mitzvot. We are not capable of perceiving this within our world. Our world was not simply made to be able to function in such a way. Our world is very much a limited space. And so the idea of Sobev, which is the great equalizer, in which there's no big, there's no small, there's no great, there's no minute. Our world, that level of divinity, which is transcendence, cannot apply itself into our world until when Mashiach comes. And at that point, the world will be refined in such a way that the world will be a receptacle for this exact type of revelation. So now we're going to bring all this concept right back to the idea of the between miracles and the reward for mitzvot. So essentially, the whole idea of a miracle can now be understood to have the same underlying idea as the reward for mitzvot. How's that? For a miracle is an action that is beyond nature. And the definition of a miracle is the opposite of nature, the breakage of nature. Nature is the way everything works in a systematic way, the way we see it, the way it was yesterday, the way it will be today, and onward. A miracle upends that entire system. In Hebrew, the word for nature, teva, comes from the same word as the word tuva'u, as in the sentence tuvu b'yam suf, mired in the Red Sea. The interrelated words convey the idea that godliness is sunk or completely concealed within nature. So the same way, you drop something into the ocean and it's concealed. It doesn't exist anymore. In fact, there are halachic ideas that in certain cases, you can nullify something by throwing it into the sea. Sometimes when something has become no longer usable because of impurity, there are halachot with regards to maser and that kind of thing. And the halacha is you throw it into the Dead Sea. It no longer has its own existence. It is completely concealed, it's mired, it's sunk into the sea, and it no longer has a unique existence. And of course, in terms of godliness, we don't see godliness at all. The maser that you threw into the sea still exists, but it has dissolved, so to speak, into the magnitude of everything, and therefore it's completely concealed.
Rabbi, you said the Dead Sea, or any sea?
The Dead Sea. Here's the Red Sea. When we said the word tubu b'yam suf, that quote is from the song at the sea, Az Yashir. But I was talking about the halacha, that certain types of maser, when they become defiled, you throw them into the Dead Sea specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear which light is the one that drowned.
Which what?
Teva, which light is for Teva?
Which what is teva?
Light.
Which is the or?
Okay. So teva is memale.
Teva is Memale, so Memale
Absolutely.
is drowning.
Memale has drowned within physicality.
Okay, thank you.
You don't see the godliness. It's sunk within within the physicality. And now he brings another one over here, which is a little bit confusing, but we need to understand the context in which he's bringing this idea. He says the word teva is also related to the word matbea, meaning coin, but specifically as expressed in the Talmud statement. Man stamps many coins with one seal, and all are similar to each other, while God stamped all of mankind with Adam's image, yet none are the same. Okay, so when we talk about the word matbea in a physical coin, they're all exactly the same. You take 1 quarter, 1 dime, 1 penny, they all, as long as they were all stamped with the same image, they look exactly the same. As of course, why, if they have an error on it, it can be very, very valuable. On the other hand, God stamps, when God uses this term teva, everything is different, even though it all has the same exact seal, so to speak. You would think, all the zebras look the same. You might think that they look the same, but the truth of the matter is that each one has their own unique imprint, and they have very different patterns when you pay attention to it. And of course, every single one of us has different fingerprints and facial expressions, etc. Go ahead.
I would say they are all in the same category, but they are different.
Right. And so the point that we're making here is that the idea of Teva is similar to God's matbea, in which he creates certain similarities. Like you said, they're all in the same category, but they're not like a human's matbea. It's not like a human's coin. A human's coin, of course, is exactly the same. We are not exactly the same. Exactly. We're not copies. We can be similar to each other, but we're all very different. So the idea here is that when God creates nature, the concept here is one of variety and differentiation, which, as we explained, is expressed through the energy of Memale. But a miracle is beyond nature. When a miracle occurs, a brand new energy from beyond the world, an expression of Sovev, shines into the world. But even more than that, when Sovev breaks into the world via a miracle, it does so while the world remains in its self-existence. Nature remains as it was. Its limiting systems continue functioning as they did prior to the miracle, besides for the one detail in which the miracle applied itself to. So there's an advantage in a miracle in terms of the fact that when it breaks into the world, you're able to perceive the idea of Sovev. We said perception of Memale is true when you just recognize that all of life is given its fatality from something. And so when you think about it, you realize that that something is God. But when a miracle happens, you're able to perceive something much greater, much higher, much more beyond. Sovev is then breaking into the world and giving a revelation in a particular detail of the world. And the world does not nullify out of its self-existence. And in fact, you have the choice. You have the choice to look at it and say, okay, is this a miracle or is this not? Even in a situation which is quite obviously a miracle, you can make your own, you still have the ability to be able to delude yourself. And again, this is very, very personal, because when you talk about my son's experience, everybody recognized that this was something unique, besides for the neonatologist, who was so focused on my son's impending death that he refused to acknowledge it. Why did he refuse to acknowledge it? So there are several reasons.
Rabbi, I can't understand what
And
you're saying.
I don't know which reason. One is simply ego. He made a statement as a doctor, and he didn't want to. It started echoing. Is it still echoing?
No, not now.
Good. Okay. So we're just talking about my own experience with my youngest son. Like I told you, there was no way for his heart and lungs to function together. He didn't have a pulmonary flow besides through the ductus arteriosus, which is very, very, very small. And it's not big enough to be able to create a proper oxygenation for an entire baby. So the doctor was not recognizing that what was going on was a miracle. Why? It could be because of ego. He made it a prediction. He made a decision, and he was going to stick to that because he's the doctor. Who do you think you are? And that's a very important thing for ourselves, because we need to recognize that sometimes unique experiences happen and we still have free choice to be able to assess the situation and say, okay, is this something that's godly or not? Everybody else recognized that something unique was going on. And I heard later from some of the nurses later that they were talking about my baby. At the same hospital where they were refusing him care, they were also calling him the miracle baby. So it's quite unique. But even when you have something that has no physical explanation, you can still decide to refuse to reconcile with the facts. And that's a special moment when Soviet comes into the world and the world remains as it was. The world remains the way with the systems God creates. It doesn't just upend everything. Just this one detail is functioning in a unique way. So this then, continuing in the text, is the deeper meaning of our opening text. You have given those who fear you a miracle so that the world itself will be uplifted in a similar manner to what will happen in the future Messianic era. So again, the term nes, lit noses, it means, we said the original meaning is a banner to be uplifted. Now we're saying a miracle so that the world is uplifted. People have a deeper perception as a result of it. Why? Because Soviet came into the world and is working even within the world so that the world itself expresses God's existence. So that's in terms of that. The next section is going to take us onto an even deeper dive into this whole conversation. And because we need to be able to understand how challenges fit into this entire conversation. Now we understand the idea of miracles versus nature. We understand the situation of how the reward for the mitzvot is the same idea as miracles. But we still need to understand where do challenges fit in this whole experience. And for that, we're going to introduce a new contrasting set of ideas. There are two different perspectives. We'll refer to them as dat elyon and dat tachton. That's the Kabbalistic terms for what we're going to describe as the lower perspective and the upper perspective, or the supernal perspective. From our perspective, all of us feel our own existence. We recognize our own self-existence. We have feelings, we have thoughts, we have actions, we make impacts, and so therefore we know ourselves to exist. We are what's referred to as a yesh. Yesh, we exist, we are. When we think about God, we think about God as ayin. Ayin means nothing. Now, this is different, very, very different than the concept of nothing, as in I have nothing in my hand, because when we're talking about God, we're talking about as God, we do not understand God. And so therefore, our existence comes from nothing. In the Latin, we use the term ex nihilo, something out of nothing. And that's the way we feel, that we feel we came into this world out of nothing. But that nothing is not a true nothing, because God does not exist. That nothing is something that is not understood and not definable. So that's the lower perspective. And inside that lower perspective, what happens is when we consider our world, when we reflect on it and we think about it and we can work to come to the conclusion as to where we came from. We are able to intellectually come to the point to appreciate God and to appreciate the fact that all the systems in the world work as they do, and that brings us to a greater appreciation of life itself and our responsibilities to the world, etc. That's the lower perspective. The upper perspective is God's perspective. God's perspective is similar to when we walk on the street, we don't even think about, it doesn't even come to mind the fact that we are pushing the molecules that are in front of us in the air. We just simply don't care. Our system of life is qualitatively so beyond the individual molecules that are, so to speak, in front of us and in our way. We simply don't consider them at all. It doesn't matter to us when we do anything for that matter. We are interacting, of course, with the molecular structure of anything that exists. But our existence and what we're trying to accomplish is well beyond the individual atoms, the individual protons or neutrons, and that we're functioning with, that we're working with. In a similar but much, much, much greater way, infinitely greater way, God is truly beyond us, beyond the entire universe and all of existence. And so therefore, God is the true existence, and we are truly nothing. That's the absolute truth. In our world, we're not able to perceive that. We're not able to handle that even. When you think about it, it's even freaky. It's not a particularly comfortable thought. It was a very funny experience when I was in yeshiva, when one of my friends sat down and explained this idea to me. I was all of 18 or 19 years old, and he explained to me quite clearly and convincingly that I really don't exist. And I was really upset. It's not a very comfortable feeling to find out that you really don't exist. And I almost grabbed him by the lapels and said, one of the rabbis in the yeshiva, and I said, do we exist or don't we exist? And he started laughing. And he said, we exist because God wants us to. I said, what the heck does that mean? And he told the following story. He said, the grandchildren of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, two of the greatest Hasidic masters, their grandchildren got married. And you can imagine a wedding like this. These people were unbelievably famous. Tens of thousands of people came on the tiny, tiny town of Zlobin to come to this wedding. The Zlobin Chasna, is what is referred to as, there was this epic Shabbos with these two great leaders together, and there are a lot of stories from that time. My grandfather's family actually comes from Zlobin. I wish I knew where they were at the time, but I have absolutely no idea. So at some point, the two rabbis were in the shul, and the place was jam-packed, and they couldn't get out. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak turned to the Alter Rebbe and said, "Mechuden," which of course means relative by marriage. Let's go through the wall. Why wait for everybody to go through to figure out some way to be able to get out of this place? You and I can just walk through the wall. And the Alter Rebbe's response is, not everything that we can do should we do. that was the kind of quip by the Alter Rebbe. So my teacher asked me, he said, what was their conversation? What were they talking about? What was, this magic tricks, what's going on here? He says, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev understood very, very, very well who his colleague were. They were good friends from many years before. And he was saying to the Alter Rebbe, both of us have the absolute understanding and perception that godliness is truly everything. The wall is truly godliness. My body is truly godliness. And when you have that absolute perception, why should the wall hold you back? Why should your body hold you back? Go through the wall. And that was his perspective. Dat Elyon. The Alter Rebbe's response was, but God created a wall. And God created a body. And we have to respect the fact that God created these things with their limitations. And so therefore, not everything that we should do, and not everything that we can do, should we do. And so that's really this concept going back and forth. And so when we're going to explore these two in this chapter 5, and we're going to ask the question, which of them is actually true? So, to begin chapter 5. To understand this idea on an even deeper level, let's evaluate two separate perspectives on the God-world dynamic. The first perspective is Dat Tachton, or the lower perspective. From this angle, the viewer is looking at God from creation. Creation recognizes its own existence. It feels itself, but since it cannot comprehend, refers to it as nothing. The nothing that it cannot feel, creation arose from nothing, or in the Hebrew, yesh me'ayin. The second perspective is Dat Elyon, or the supernal perspective. From this view, God's being is the only true existence, as he has no source. And this is something that, of course, Maimonides speaks of at length in the beginning of his book Mishneh Torah, because he says one of the foundations of Judaism, you need to understand that God is not, like even, in the Christian world, they look at God as a gigantic human being. I once had when I was one child, and so therefore Shabbat afternoon in the store, I was like, yay, something to play with. So I spoke with them for a while, and they said something like, what happens if God is standing here before you? I said, okay, stop right there. Does God stand? They said, of course. I said, do you mean that God has two legs? They said, well, yeah. And I said, okay, in that case, you're talking about a gigantic human being, and I'm talking about God. And there's nothing we have no crossover. As long as people think of God as this male with a gigantic beard or something like that, they are completely out of touch with what God is. Completely. God is not definable, because any definition is something that he created. And so therefore, the only way for us, only from himself, and like we continue here, he's not dependent upon or the result of anything. He's not Tinkerbell. Believe in fairies and they'll exist. Clap if you believe in fairies. It's not God. All of creation, by contrast, is utterly incomparable to him and is considered nothing, or as he adds in the parentheses, as nothing, an infinitely greater contrast. He's quoting two different places in the Zohar. Sometimes it says that God, that when we're talking about the world at large vis-a-vis God, we say that it is ayin nechshav. It is nothing. But sometimes we even use the term ke'ayin. It is like nothing. So you would think that the word like nothing is actually more comparable, because we're trying to use something to be able to synthesize the idea. But the word as nothing means that nothing itself is not even a good enough example to be able to describe the infinite contrast. So, for philosophy majors, I'm sure you're loving this. Everybody else, if your head is spinning, that's fine. We'll keep going and we'll be fine. We'll get there. So we are the nothing that arose from the ultimate something, ayin yesh. So again, dat tachton is the idea of yesh me'ayin, that we are creation, we exist, and we come from something that we cannot comprehend. We come from quote unquote nothing. And God is, on the other hand, from God's perspective, the dat elyon, the perspective is that we are the true nothing. Our existence is totally and absolutely incomparable and nothing or as nothing in comparison to him. And God is the true existence. He is the ultimate of existence because his existence is not dependent upon anything else. The Rebbe points out now, these two perspectives may look like mirror images of each other, but they are not at all. This is because from the supernal perspective, from Dat Elyon, both the something and the nothing are definitively true. God is the truest of all existence. Consider that he is, as stated, not dependent upon or the result of anything else. What is the definition of truth? The definition of truth, interestingly enough, is that the word emet, aleph, mem, taf. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Mem is the middle, and taf is the final letter. And so therefore the truest definition of truth is utter consistency, no change, none. So God is the only being that does not change. God does not change in himself. He's not dependent upon anything. He's not the result of anything. He doesn't get older or anything like that. There's nothing like that that's going on. And our existence is truly nothing because we are actually nothing in comparison with God. You might even say that we don't even take up any space in his realm. Tofes makom. It's a very difficult term to be able to translate because it's more than just the spatial reality. It's also the conceptual reality. We are not. We don't take up any space, but it's more than just that we don't take up space. The same way we don't care about the molecules in front of us, the same way, exact way. Analogy, which I mentioned to you before. Think of a ray of light as it still exists within the body of the sun. Even though the light is as bright as it could possibly be while being that close to its source, it is completely nullified in the vast intensity of the sun. It is as nothing. So even within our existence, when considered within godliness, we are as nothing. But in the lower perspective, the something is but a created being. So going back to Datachton, the Yesh was created. Its existence is only the result of an active force that propels it into being. By itself, it is literally nothing. It only, somewhat falsely, calls itself something by virtue of the fact that it feels its own existence. And from this angle, the term nothing is likewise not true. The source is only called nothing by the virtue of the fact that creation cannot grasp it. So again, when you look at the Yesh, God is the ultimate Yesh. He is the ultimate existence. When you look at the Ayin, you look at the nothing. Well, we are truly the ultimate nothing from that perspective. If you're taking the Dat Elyon perspective. If you're looking at the Dat Tachton perspective, it's the exact opposite. The Yesh is a false Yesh. Our existence is not an ultimate existence. We live today, and God willing, we'll live for many, 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 many more years. But there's a future. We mention it every single day in davening. You know, sometimes, at some point, way many, many years in the future, he'll take my soul from me. That's the reality. So our existence is very false. On the other hand, when we refer to God as being nothing, that's certainly not true. Because God is not nothing. He's just not nothing that we can comprehend. And so therefore we refer to him as quote unquote nothing, nothing that we can grasp. But the Rebbe says it's not so simple to be able to just cancel out that tachton. Fact of the matter is that there's more to it. And we're just going to finish up with this paragraph quickly, and because it's just the end of the chapter. Still, we cannot infer that the lower perspective is objectively false. After all, creation was given its existence by the energy of Mamale, which is itself godliness. Furthermore, Torah and Mitzvot were given to a physical world, and they are certainly true. However, this truth is not qualitatively the same as Dat Elyon, the supernal perspective. There are actually several levels of truth. There's the edge of truth, the ultimate truth, and those are different levels of the way we interact with truth. When we say nothing but the truth, tell the truth and nothing but the truth, well, it's not so simple. While the name Elohim is but one of the 7 gods of names of God, which cannot, let's try that again. While the name of Elohim is one of the 7 names of God, which may not be erased, it does not contain the same elements of truth as the name Havaya. Havaya excited in accordance with one opinion, which is the ultimate truth, but yet both of these are the words of the living God. Even the rejected opinion is godliness. So going back to my teacher's explanation, is that yes, the world does actually exist. The world does have a true existence, but it's just not the same qualitative truth. It's not the ultimate truth. And why is that important? That's important because when we consider challenges, we need to understand where the challenges come from. And we need to understand what the world is with regards to God's will. And when we understand those things, we're able to rise up. So a little bit of an intense philosophical day, but no philosophy majors here. I guess not. Okay. Or maybe everybody's a philosophy major. In any case, I want to wish everybody an incredibly successful day, and I look forward to seeing you guys again, God willing, back to the normal schedule next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the blessing and for the class.